Hello ladies and gentlemen. Today I'm going to be demonstrating how to create an Islamic inspired clay tile. I'm going to be starting to draw with paper and pencil, transfer this onto clay, fire it in a kiln, and then decorate with glaze, and then fire it a second time. It'll turn out like this. So here's how you do it. You're going to start by grabbing these materials: sketchbook, template, pencil, scissors, as well as a ruler. You're going to take your template, lay it on your piece of sketchbook paper and trace it. If you can fit 2 squares per paper, trace both. If you only can fit 1, that's okay. Next, take a ruler and draw an X through each corner of your squares. Again, if you can fit 2 squares per piece of paper, do this twice. If only 1, just do it once. Then, you are going to be taking several pieces of paper, 2 to 4 pieces, and stacking them on top of each other and cutting out your squares. This is going to allow you to create multiple squares all at once to save you time. You want a total of 4 squares with X's on them when you're completed with this step. Next, you're going to be drawing a shape along one of your blank pieces of paper. Only draw half of the shape, fold it in half, and cut it out. Both sides will be exactly the same and equal if you cut it out when it is folded. This is a symmetrical shape. Once you have your shape, you're going to be putting that off to the side. Next, take a blank piece of paper, another one of the 4 squares that you've created, and measure out from the center equally. I did 1 inch from the center. Then I'm taking the shape that I just created, putting the point of it on that 1 inch measurement and tracing it, making sure that the line of symmetry is splitting my shape in half. Then I'm rotating my square and putting the symmetrical shape in the exact same spot on the other side of the corner. And then I repeat this process a 3rd as well as a 4th time. Be sure the paper is not moving as you're tracing the template. Make sure that the shape is in the exact same distance from the center as well. Take your time and create a high quality radial design shape. Once you're done with one, go back to the paper that you cut from and draw a new shape. Fold it in half, cut it out, and use that to create a new blank one. Once you have a second one done, go back to the scrap paper, draw a 3rd shape, fold it in half, cut it out, and then take that to another blank square and draw a 3rd and final one. Once you have 3 high quality rail designs, choose one for your final. Once you have 3 different unique designs, each one different and each one radial, then choose your best and favorite and final one, and that's going to be the one you transfer onto clay for your final Islamic inspired clay tile. For your clay steps, you're going to need a piece of canvas, a pencil, rolling pin, 2 slats, an engraving tool, knife, as well as your design. You're going to start by laying your slats down on either side of your clay and using your rolling pin. Notice how the slats are not touching the actual clay. I'm also rolling from the center up and the center down. Don't roll from the bottom to the top or the top to the bottom. Next, put your square template on your tile, hold it gently with your hand, and cut out using the knife tool. The knife tool should be used cutting vertical and as upright as possible. Remove the excess clay and save that for later. You can use that to practice some engraving. Next, write your actual name on the back, not the word name. Write your name on the back. Next, take your paper tile design and you're going to be tracing and outlining all your lines. All these different symmetrical shapes, you're tracing to put pressure down through so your design is transferred onto the clay. What I usually do is check each design to make sure it's punctured through enough to make sure that you have an impression. Otherwise, all of that is going to be for naught. So make sure you're putting pressure down enough so you can get that relief or that texture through. So before you remove that paper and kind of mess up your design, just take a peek on all the different corners. If they're there, then they're good to go. After you've practiced engraving on the scrap piece of paper, go ahead and move on to the final. When you're using your wire engraving tool, you're going to remove carefully clay from your tile. Notice how I'm holding it sideways. I'm trying to remove the clay, not just put a mark in the clay. So every time I do a stroke or a line, I remove that clay with my other opposite hand. Take your time and go slow. Don't rush. Remember, this video is sped up at double the time or twice the rate, so you should be going a lot slower than this video is demonstrating. Once you removed all the clay in your area for your shapes and your symbols, go through and make sure there's no imperfections or any flaws. There might be some different clay chunks that are in the engraved areas you might have to remove, and you might have to kind of smooth down the corners or the edges of the clay as well. Once your clay tile has been fired once and is ready for glaze, you're going to be decorating it using these following materials: glaze, various size brushes, sponge, water container, newspaper, as well as black glaze. Step is to take black glaze and blotch it all over all your engraved areas. You're not concerned about being too careful here, you're just really trying to get it in all the cracks and the engraved areas. But also don't be wasteful and cover the whole surface with black glaze. Once you've allowed it to dry, you need to take a damp sponge, wring it out into a container of water, and then scrub all sides of the brush against the tile. Then I would clean off my sponge, wring it out, and then repeat these steps. So just use all those sides up to clean off your surface. As you're scrubbing, you won't be able to remove all of the black from every single crack. That's just part of the process. So once you get it as clean as you can let it dry and then start transitioning to using colored glaze. I'm going to start with my detailed areas using a detailed brush. When you're filling in the detailed areas with the detailed brush, you want to be very careful to not let the color glaze get into the cracks. So you're going to be going through and making sure that the color that you use for each quadrant is the same. So for all of these shapes that I'm doing, I'm using the color purple, and I'm going to make sure that's consistent, because a radial design means it repeats every single degree or every single rotation. So I'm filling in all these lines or all these areas very carefully. Now, once you've coated everything once, let it dry and then repeat the process a second time and a third time. All colored glaze must be applied with 3 coats, not just one. So as soon as I'm done with this top right one here, I'm going to repeat that for all of them a second time and all of them a third time. Now that I've colored everything that is purple with 3 coats, I'm moving on to my background layer. Notice that I'm using a broad brush or a bigger brush here because I'm filling in larger areas. This is going to allow you to fill in a large area very quickly. I wouldn't go right to the edge with the details with this brush. That's going to be difficult to do. Notice how I'm leaving kind of the edges of my different shapes blank. I'm going to come back to there with my detailed brush. So I'm filling in the broad areas with the broad brush strokes, being really careful to not let any drip into the engraved areas. Now I'm switching to my detail brush, and I make a mistake right there, the first thing I do. And I'm going to be going around all of the areas here very carefully. Now as you're applying this glaze, you want to make it as thick as possible, but also under control as possible. So you want to use 3 coats of every color that you use, but the thicker, the better. So I'm applying it thick, but making sure that it's not dripping down into the engraved areas. So try to walk that tightrope or that razor blade of expectations that I have there. So I'm filling in all of the edges with that color. Once you've let it dry, you can try to put a little black glaze into that engraved areas. But if you do that, you could very well make it worse than what it originally was. So this is an example of what not to do. So if you try to drop it in there, it could be okay, or it might not look great. So most of the time I'd recommend you don't do this for this exact reason. You're going to end up making it worse than better.